This is Democracy Watch. Mark, you and I have spoken at length about one route in particular that Donald Trump is taking to suppress voters. We now have an update in court. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, this is a blockbuster ruling from Washington, D.C. federal court, where the federal judge hearing a case challenging Donald Trump's executive order that, among other things, tried to impose a proof of citizenship requirement on the federal registration form. Okay, that effort by Donald Trump has now been blocked on a permanent basis by a federal district court judge in Washington, D.C. I am proud that my law firm represented the Democratic Party plaintiffs in bringing that lawsuit. And this is a big victory because anyone who's been watching these videos, anyone who's been paying attention knows that this proof of citizenship requirement is at the top of the voter suppression checklist of the Republican Party. They tried to pass it as a law when they couldn't get it through there. Donald Trump went with this executive order. Now that has been thwarted. But make no mistake, they will be back with this. And their goal is to use this as a way to disenfranchise married women who change their last names, first-time registrants who don't have a passport or an original birth certificate. This is a big deal as we head towards the 2026 midterm elections.
And you just touched on what my next question was going to focus on here, which is, there are going to be critics of this who say, why not just offer proof of citizenship? What could possibly go wrong? And so can you talk about the ways in which this is not intended to operate in good faith and this is solely intended to disenfranchise voters?
Yes, this has almost nothing to do with proving citizenship and everything to do with preventing people from being able to register to vote. So in a nutshell, what these proof of citizenship laws or executive orders or rules aim to do is to say that if you are registering to vote, then you have to prove you're a citizen. Well, there's only really two documents that prove citizenship. One is an original birth certificate or a certified copy. So how many of you out there right now, if I asked you to provide not a photocopy of birth certificate, but your original birth certificate or one that has a raised seal from your state, how many of you would be able to produce that? Okay, because that's one of two documents. The only other one is a valid US passport. And a lot of people don't have valid US passports. I mean, for example, young people don't tend to have passports because the only time they get passports is when they're traveling abroad. A lot of transient voters, people who move around a lot, who maybe don't have reasons to go overseas, don't have passports. And so if those are the only two documents you can use to prove citizenship, you're going to have a whole lot of people who can't prove citizenship. Now, a couple of other pieces of this that are further traps. Married women who change their last name, of course, their name won't match the name on their birth certificate because they changed their last name. So now you need to add another piece of certified paperwork into the mix if the state that you go to recognizes that marriage certificate. We've had lots of reports of married women saying that they were married in a different state and they showed up and people didn't know how to make heads or tails of the paperwork they were providing. Finally, one last thing, Brian, and think about this. What is the first big executive order that Donald Trump signed? It was to say that being born in the United States does not establish citizenship. What does that mean? It means that in Donald Trump's America, not even the birth certificate will be enough. The only way of establishing proof of citizenship will be the passport. That is not by accident, that is on purpose.
Mark, I want to talk about the existence of fraud because when you're going to pass these laws or wage these lawsuits, presumably you would do it because you're looking to solve a problem. But can you talk about the instances of fraud and whether that problem that these lawsuits or these executive orders or these laws by Republicans seek to fix even exist?
Yeah, so there is virtually no fraud in our elections. There is vanishingly small fraud with non-citizen voting. And here, what it's actually getting at is not even voting. It's actually getting at voter registration, right? Like there are lots of checks on the system to make sure non-citizens don't register, but there are even more checks after they register to make sure they don't vote, right? Because the voting rolls are cleaned on a periodic basis. So, this is searching for a problem that does not exist, but it's important not to get derailed because This is not about fraud. Like the Republican National Committee didn't come up with this because they were trying to pass the most anti-fraud statute. The Republican National Committee, Donald Trump and his cronies, the right-wing voter suppression infrastructure came up with this because they knew this would disenfranchise a lot of Democrats without impacting as many Republicans. This is just a pure partisan play, like so many of these voter suppression efforts are. And one of the things that drives me insane about the legacy media is they're like, well, maybe these will backfire. They're not going to backfire. Republicans know what they're doing with voter suppression. They know who they are harming, and they know they're harming Democrats. It's the same thing. You know, you hear some of this, Brian, frankly, from some of the legacy media outlets about the redistricting. They're like, well, maybe the lines they drew in Texas will backfire. Well, no, they drew the lines knowing that they won't backfire. And for God's sake, we cannot trust our democracy to the hope that Republicans in their voter suppression or illegal gerrymandering are inefficient or self-sabotaging. We need to stand up and fight. We need to fight against these redistricting maps. We need to ensure that Democrats in positions of power and governors and state legislatures are doing everything they can to counteract them. And when it comes to these voter suppression laws, you know, I make no apologies that we fight hard in court. You know, people said we weren't going to win this lawsuit. Well, we sued and we won.
And I would just use this opportunity to highlight, if you're not yet subscribed to Democracy's Docket, which is the news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything voting election, if it isn't the promise of fearless independent journalism that brings you in, it's also the fact that Mark and his team are fighting on the front lines where these battles are waged right now in the courtroom. So again, there are a million reasons to sign up. I use this on a daily basis. It is an excellent resource. So if you're not yet signed up for Democracy Docket, I'm going to put that link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Mark, are Democrats doing enough outside of your efforts, for example, to combat these efforts to suppress the vote? It feels like so much of our strategy is batting back what the Republicans are putting forward. What proactive approach can we take here so it's not just us on the defense, but it's actually us on the offense?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked this question because, you know, I have been working on a pro-democracy agenda that every blue state can adopt, okay? That every blue state, whether you are California or New York or New Jersey or Virginia, or you are Washington State or Oregon or Colorado, that every state where there are Democrats in power, they should adopt this agenda. And I've been holding off rolling it out, frankly, because I haven't wanted to get in the way of today's election. So, you know, I want to make sure that we focus on the thing in front of us. But I'm going to be rolling that out in the days ahead. And I am looking forward, Brian, to coming back on with you and discussing exactly what those things are.
And finally, something that we're going to be looking at tonight is how successful Prop 50 is. And so can you talk about the importance of Prop 50 in California, not just as it relates to redrawing the maps in my state, but also on giving something of political cover to governors and state legislatures in other states where they may be looking to see if they have that permission structure to be able to redraw their maps?
Yeah, and it's not just redraw maps, right? It's also promote voting rights in other legislation. Right. I mean, like what's happened in California is potentially transformative for democracy. I mean, assuming that Prop 50 passes, which it looks like it's going to, and assuming it passes with a big margin, which thank you, Brian, for everything you have done to help elevate Prop 50 and to raise money for Prop 50. One of the real heroes right now has been Brian Tyler Cohen in this Prop 50 discussion. But assuming it passes by the margins that I hope it does, what it says to Democrats around the country is that we can embrace these pro-democracy measures. We can embrace passing laws. We don't need to cower and say, well, if we do this thing, we'll look partisan. If we do this new map, it'll look like we are not committed to nonpartisan districting. If we promote early vote or voter registration or shorter lines, people will accuse us of just trying to help Democrats. Like, we need to get out of that defensive crouch. We need to get out of the mindset of thinking that if we do anything to promote democracy, we are somehow doing something bad. No, if we are promoting democracy, we are doing something good. And kudos to Gavin Newsom and kudos to you, Brian, for leading that mindset shift in the most dramatic way possible, which is this Prop 50 in California. And I think this is going to spread like wildfire for Democrats across the country and pay dividends, not just in the redistricting context, but like I said, in the broader voting rights and democracy context, and not just in 2026. I think this is potentially the thing that will set off a revolution of pro-democracy activism around this country.
Yeah, and I think that finding Democrats who are willing to fight for these issues and to lean in 10 toes forward, aggressive on these issues, because we've had a Democratic Party for a very long time that is more predisposed to be circumspect and judicious and not aggressive on these issues. But hopefully what Prop 50 will set off is an entire wave that goes to the other states that shows that, hey, taking aggressive action to fight for what you believe in actually will pay off dividends from an electoral perspective.
And we've seen that, by the way, in some of the polling that has come out in the last few days leading up to this. It's very interesting. If you look at the NBC poll, the poll that came out on Sunday, as to what the top issue that people are focused on for the midterm elections, democracy was at the top. It was literally the number one issue.
Yeah.
And if you look at the CNN poll that came out, I think also on Sunday, it was the number two issue behind prices and the economy. It was actually ahead of immigration. It was ahead of crime. It was ahead of healthcare. And I don't think we'd be seeing these democracy issues jump to the top of the polls without Prop 50. Because what Prop 50 did is it put in the consciousness of Americans, Democrats and independents, and even a handful of right-minded Republicans, although God help yourself go finding them. But it put in their mind that this is a fight worth having.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing for people to think that the democracy issue is worth having the fight unless you think you can win. And what's happening in California is showing it can win. And already we see the dividends paying out, like I said, in Virginia, where the Democrats already in the state legislature there are also finding a creative way to move forward with their districting. And I think it's going to really set the 2026 elections to put democracy issues front and center.
And no one has been a bigger champion for those issues than you. So for folks who are watching right now, if you're not yet signed up for Democracy Docket and you want to elevate Mark's voice, which could not be more important than it is right now, please sign up for Democracy Docket. I'm going to put that link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.